Another Sunday and another Shonen Jump magazine drop, and this time we got our new issue of Jujutsu Kaisen. And this week's chapter was rather interesting as it potentially outlines a whole new future for the series. But before we begin, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so I can keep bringing you more anime content. So, chapter 238 has dropped, and we have our conclusion to the Kashimo Sukuna fight, which went about as well as I thought it was going to in our last episode, but we also got a new potential future in this comic. So let's go ahead and run down what happened. First, we got to see more combat between Sukuna and Kashimo, if you want to call it that. This was probably one of the more underwhelming fights I think I've ever read in Jujutsu Kaisen. Gege has this incredible gift for choreography and fighting styles, and even making how the different powers and curse techniques work, and unfortunately not a lot of that is on display and really hasn't been throughout a lot of Shinjuku Showdown. Not because the things throwing around aren't interesting, just because they're not being showcased in an interesting way or even being displayed in an interesting way. We got Sukuna throwing around some more slashes and Kashimo dodging that, Kashimo kind of unleashing like a bigger lightning bolt, and then, you know, Sukuna ultimately besting him using, to be frank, I'm not really sure what he used. I'm not sure whether that final attack came from his cursed object or if it came from his cutting technique. But we get a conversation between the two about the nature of strength and loneliness, which is our third conversation about that now, and honestly none of it's making me like Sukuna any better. He's still just kind of a rude dude. I was going to use more, but not doing that right now. I'm not mad enough for that. It's kind of odd that at this point in the game you're trying in any way to make us like Sukuna, because he's not at all. He's not an understandable character. He's just a villain to be detained and gotten rid of at this point in the series, and I don't think I have any more interest in him beyond that. On the flip side, that leads us to a very interesting conflict here, because the fight with Kashimo wraps up just as two things happen. One is that Hikari's domain expansion has broken, and I can't quite tell in the chapter if music is playing or not, so I don't know if he got the jackpot. And then the second thing is that two new fighters have arrived. Yuji Itadori has showed up to fight Sukuna, as has Higuruma, which leaves us with a very interesting possibility for what can come in, sadly, 2 weeks, not 1 week, but we'll talk about it. So now that Yuji has officially joined the battle, we can expect all the swirling of questions to pick back up again in regards to, does he have a curse technique? Did he inherit Sukuna's technique? What's the strategy that he can beat Sukuna? Can he beat Sukuna at all? Can Higuruma's ability suppress Sukuna? So I have some theories on this, and I have two. Both involve Higuruma, but hear me out on this, because I think one is way more valid than the other. It's also more gross, but let's talk about it. The first of these is that Higuruma will trigger his domain expansion, Deadly Sentencing, will drag Yuji and Sukuna in there, and will have kind of like a court case trial, like Law and Order Jujutsu Edition. I don't think this one's very likely, because, to be honest, I don't think this is going to work very well on Sukuna. I have no doubt Higuruma's abilities will suppress Sukuna. I just have this eerie feeling that somehow he will evade the rules of the domain expansion and will get out of it somehow. Whether that is just by keeping silent, by doing anything, using Megumi's memories somehow, I just don't think it's going to be that effective. Which is why I don't think the trial will involve Yuji as a defendant or a accuser. Instead, I think Higuruma is going to use his ability as a distraction. He's going to drag Sukuna into his domain and try and hold him there for as long as he can. Which, depending on how it actually works in there, we've only gotten a brief glimpse of it. You know, trials can take a long time, so we might actually get that. I think in that stance, what's going to happen then is Yuji is going to have to prepare for his fight against Sukuna. Now, my belief is that Yuji has finally awakened Sukuna's curse technique. He is literally biting his own skin and flesh off when he's arriving to fight Sukuna. I think he's doing that to jumpstart the ability. It looks really gross, but I think that's what he's doing. And then secondly, and I think he's going to do this, A, so Sukuna can't do it, and B, so he can get the boost in power, and potentially, maybe even more than that, he's going to eat Satoru Gojo. I know that sounds so gross, but hear me out. The idea of this was we always knew Gojo wasn't trying to kill Sukuna. He couldn't. A, he's in Megami, and then B, it will trigger the final, clause for ending the culling games. But there's probably a couple different ways they can try and force him out of it. The simplest being that Megami's original plan all the way back in Cursed Woman Must Die, trying to force Sukuna to form a pact with Yuji by proving he's not strong enough without it. I think this might have been what Gojo was trying for, he just actually wasn't, due to the mixture of Sukuna's technique and Megami's technique. Neither one of those on their own would have been strong enough, but together they were just enough. I think that Yuji is going to essentially absorb Gojo's technique, the Limitless, and combine it with, if I had to bet, a bunch of other people's techniques he's absorbed. There were a lot of people left around after, Shibuya incident. I think he's going to weaponize all of those as an inventory, with Gojo's Limitless obviously being useful, but he won't rely on that super a lot. I could see him maybe getting the 6 eyes. Now, you can only have one 6 eyes user at a time, but they're not always born concurrently, and there is a possibility that he might actually be able to absorb that technique. If he can, he will spontaneously almost probably adapt to all the techniques that he's acquired, and he'll probably be able to beat Sukuna. Sukuna is severely weakened now, even after healing. And as an added bonus, if Higuruma's technique can affect Sukuna's curse techniques or abilities in any way, that's just an extra hindrance. But why don't you let me know what you think is going to happen next week in a comment down below.